Welcome to this screencast talking about the didactical contract and the pedagogical rationales of online education. My name is Jan Sølberg and I am an associate professor with the Department of Science Education, where I, among other things, work with teaching teachers of higher education. And in that capacity, I also often discuss the rationales of having different technologies used in online education. And today we're going to be talking about how that affects the students and what pitfalls we should be aware of when thinking about implementing online or blended learning as part of a course. First concept I want to introduce you to is the didactical contract. Now, the didactical contract is basically aligning the different expectations of what the students bring with them to the course, and in that same capacity also talking about what the teachers may expect of the students. So combining the expectations of students and teachers to form some sort of, you could say, virtual contract, wherein it becomes clear what the students need to do and what the teacher needs to do in order to have a productive course. How this works is basically and if there is no didactical contract, or the didactical contract is not clear enough, especially when it comes to talking about online technologies or any other new technology that you introduce to a given teaching situation, you run the risk of losing the students, not because the content is irrelevant or because the teaching format isn't motivating as promised, but simply for the reason that the students don't know what to expect, what's expected of them, and respond in a manner where they try to focus not so much on the actual things that they should be learning, but more about the context in which it's being presented. So that's an important concept to have in mind, that whenever you introduce something new, or just in general, whenever you approach your teaching situation, you should always be aware that you try to establish some sort of didactical contract between the students and the teacher. I'll return a little bit to what that might look like in the case of using technology. So, just to sum up, a didactical contract is aligning more or less implicit expectations of teachers and students regarding the framing of both teaching and learning. So, moving on with that in mind, we can ask, what do the students think about using online blended learning as part of a course? The following will be a tour around some of the more prevalent points, and obviously depending on to which extent you use certain technologies, the proficiency with which you use them, and also to which extent which types of technologies you use, there may be differing opinions. But in general, you can find some traits that points to potentials of pitfalls, and I'll go through them one at a time. First of all, one of the things that the student like is that they can work when it suits them best. They are able to choose when a given assignment is dealt with, and they can do it in their own time and in their own tempo, which is an important aspect. Another part is having online or multimodal ways of framing the content, using video, using animations, using all kinds of different technologies. You can help students understand what is meant, and also you can have students create multimodal presentations of their work and have them interact in multimodal ways in order to help them understand what they're supposed to be learning. They also find that it's very helpful to have time to think about what they respond. This is particularly true for students of a different language or cultural background, especially in the Danish university environment. Danes are used to discussing a lot, and that is not necessarily true for other cultures. So if you are struggling with your language, as well as not normally used to blurting out your opinions, online discussion boards, for example, give you time to think about your responses before you submit them. They also provide students with the opportunity to get help between classes when they need it. So you can have different technologies that afford you various ways of revisiting certain difficult topics or testing yourself in order to get help. But it also could be a way to access the teacher between classes where there might be issues for the student to deal with, and they don't have to wait until the class starts to be able to do that. They also find that there's, generally speaking, more feedback to be found using different technologies, and especially online and blended learning technologies. They find that they get the response they do, the feedback on the responses they provide, not just from the teacher but also from the other students, and that helps a lot for them to understand that they actually do matter. On the flip side, moving to the back of the row of the students, you'll find that some of the students find the environment very lonely. It's a big empty virtual space, and particularly for those courses that are purely online, some students find a lack of social interaction in the real world difficult to deal with. There are also certain qualities about online blended learning where the general assumption about young people today is that they're capable of handling technology to a much larger extent than may be the case. They are not necessarily more proficient in doing all the technical stuff online as might be expected of them, of course. So they need to know what to do technologically. If they are not able to do this, this becomes a huge and detrimental a barrier for their learning, and they need clear instructions about how to deal with technical issues and should have access to support to deal with that so it doesn't become this barrier. Another aspect of being online is understanding what proper netiquette is. That is to say, what is the proper way to respond to certain things online, what kind of language is accepted, what kind of responses are expected of you, what do you do in order to keep a conversation going, and things like that. These are often not made explicit for the students, and it can be useful to have a very clear definition of what is acceptable behavior or acceptable things to be doing online. This, of course, ties very neatly with the didactical contract, as I talked about earlier, making expectations clear for the students as well as teachers. They also find that sometimes, because of the asynchronous capacity of technologies online, that ability to be able to write into cyberspace and then expect some answer that may or may not come in a prompt manner, that can lead to frustration when the responses are too late, especially when the responses expected are from the teacher. And this pulls the teacher into a dilemma of spending their time online, because you can easily get sucked into spending way too much time and effort on online assignments and responding to student questions, because you're always you always have easy access to the technology on both ends, and the students may come to expect that their responses, there should be responses to the answer in a very, very short time, over weekends, and even perhaps when the teacher is away doing other things on a holiday or similar things. So that needs to be addressed as well. Then there's the question of being a lurker. A lurker is someone who is not necessarily not active, but is not necessarily visibly active in a given situation. they can be very active in the sense that they read everything that's going on, they do what they need to do in order to learn what they're supposed to learn, but they don't contribute actively to discussions or participate in polls or write essays or whatever assignments there may be for them online. And it needs to be considered whether or not that is acceptable. And it needs to be considered whether or not it's detrimental to these students' learning to be forced to participate in certain things, and if it's actually necessary for them to be active participants in all aspects of the course, or the online parts of the course, or you can live with the fact that some people simply choose not to participate actively because of various reasons. Also, there's a pitfall with these technologies that students can get the feeling that they don't necessarily have to do the work if they don't want to. They may feel that it's okay to neglect certain assignments, and it should be very clear which are optional and which are mandatory. Then there is the fact that online technologies allow for students to commit submissions that never go away. Once it's out on the internet, it's very difficult to remove it, and that could cause some students to give pause to their responses. They can be censoring themselves in order to not appear stupid online in a way that would stay forever and be accessible to the teacher. So that is also a consideration to be had. So when is online blended learning more useful than other tools and teaching formats? That is a question that brings us back to the didactical contract, because basically that has to do with what you expect of your students and what they may reasonably expect of you as a teacher. In the end, in order to have a successful implementation of learning and teaching activities wherein online technologies are part of it, you have to be very clear about what kind of changes that imposes on the students' behavior and what they might need to be informed of in order for it to be successful. There is no guarantee that any one technology will change anything, especially not necessarily in a positive way. Each technology has their advantage and disadvantage, and you can take courses and read online material on each of those, and you should do that in preparation of implementation of any of them. But basically, the idea of using technology in education is no different from any you could say now outdated technology. The use of a blackboard, the use of a pen had similar implications, still has similar implications for the learning outcomes of students. If it's not aligned with what they're expected to do, if the didactical contract isn't clear for them, it's unlikely that they will be nearly as effective as they should be in their learning and in the way they engage in the teaching activities. So as mentioned, the whole point of this talk is basically to get you to think about how you might establish a didactic contract that will make the introduction of technologies be a positive thing and something that does not distract the students from learning what they're supposed to be learning.